Windows isn't getting better. It's getting slower, louder, and more crowded with things you never asked for. And Microsoft knows most people will just live with it. But a small group of developers did the one thing Microsoft never expected. They took Windows apart, threw out everything it was forcing on people, and rebuilt it clean. Microsoft can't stop them, and by the end of this, you'll understand exactly why Windows is collapsing, and what the people who saw it coming did instead. Between the collapse of Windows and AtlasOS. So while Windows keeps falling apart, a handful of people quietly built the fix Microsoft never wanted you to have. By 1997, Microsoft controlled 90% of the global desktop operating system market. Not 50, not 70. 9 out of every 10 computers on the planet ran their software. Windows 95 had launched 2 years earlier to lines around the block, people camping overnight to buy an operating system set to the Rolling Stones' Start Me Up. Office was generating $9.4 billion a year. Internet Explorer had 96% of the browser market. That is not a technology company. That is a toll booth on the entire information economy, and Microsoft knew it. Steve Ballmer, who took over as CEO in January 2000, ran across a stage at a developer conference soaked in sweat, screaming, "Developers! Developers! Developers!" into a microphone. It was not a performance. It was a confession. The entire empire ran on one thing, making sure every developer built for Windows and only for Windows. Lock in the developers, you lock in the users. Lock in the users, you lock in the money. At its peak in late 1999, Microsoft's market cap hit $620 billion, equivalent to roughly $1.1 trillion today. They had 97.4% of the global desktop OS market. Internet Explorer had 96% of browsers. Office had no meaningful competition. Then the internet stopped being a place you visited from a desktop. It became the desktop itself. Google launched in 1998, Gmail in 2004, the iPhone in 2007, and suddenly the operating system, not the thing Microsoft had built everything on, stopped mattering as much as the services running on top of it. The U.S. Department of Justice had already filed its antitrust case in May 1998, arguing Microsoft had illegally maintained its monopoly by forcing manufacturers to bundle Internet Explorer and destroying Netscape in the process. The case settled in 2001. Microsoft paid $0 in fines. Zero. The most powerful software monopoly in the history of consumer technology walked away without writing a single check. That is the moment everything changed. Because the lesson Microsoft took from that case was not stop forcing things on people. The lesson was force things faster before anyone can stop you. And the first test of that new strategy was something so catastrophically stupid that their own engineers tried to stop it. They were ignored. On October 26, 2012, Microsoft launched Windows 8, and they removed the Start button on a desktop computer. The Start button that had been the central navigation element of Windows since 1995, the button in the Rolling Stones commercial, the button that 1.3 billion people had used for 17 years, was gone, replaced by a touchscreen interface called Metro, designed for tablets. What they told you, Windows 8 was the future, a unified experience across tablets, phones, and desktops that would let Microsoft compete with Apple's iPad. What they actually did, they took the interface that over 1 billion people had used since 1995 and replaced it with something that required completely different muscle memory, with no option to revert, and a full-screen app launcher that made no sense on a 27-inch monitor. The reaction was immediate. PC sales, already declining, collapsed further. IDC and Gartner both reported that Windows 8 had failed to drive any PC refresh cycle, the opposite of what Microsoft had promised investors. Surface RT, the tablet built specifically to showcase Windows 8, generated a $900 million inventory write-down in a single quarter. $900 million, written off in 1 quarter. I think it's fair to say that Windows 8 was not our finest hour, admitted Steven Sinofsky, the executive who had led its development, in a 2017 interview. He had already been forced out of Microsoft in November 2012, 3 weeks after launch. But here's what matters. Sinofsky left, the strategy didn't, because Windows 8 wasn't just a bad product. It was the moment Microsoft stopped asking what users wanted and started deciding what users needed. And the next version of Windows wasn't going to ask for your permission at all. In the summer of 2015, Microsoft launched Windows 10 as a free upgrade for Windows 7 and 8.1 users. The offer was generous. The execution was a war against user autonomy. In September 2015, Microsoft began automatically downloading Windows 10 installation files, gigabytes of data, onto Windows 7 and 8.1 machines, not offering, not suggesting, downloading, silently, in the background, on computers you had not consented to upgrade. In October 2015, Microsoft pre-checked the Windows 10 upgrade as an optional update in Windows Update. Users who had automatic updates enabled woke up one morning to find their operating system had been replaced overnight. Microsoft called it an accident. They fixed it after 1 week. The upgrade had already happened on millions of machines. In March 2016, Windows 7 and 8.1 machines began upgrading to Windows 10 with no user interaction at all. Not a misclick, not a misunderstanding. Automatic, uninvited, irreversible. And then, in June 2016, Microsoft altered the upgrade notification dialog so that clicking the red X to close the window, the universal symbol for no in every piece of software ever built, was reinterpreted as consent for a scheduled upgrade. Closing the window meant yes. A California woman named Terry Goldstein sued Microsoft after an unwanted Windows 10 upgrade crashed her travel agency's computer system. $10,000. Microsoft, generating $93.6 billion in annual revenue that year, appealed. Then settled. $10,000. That is what your consent was worth to them. By July 2016, Windows 10 had been installed on 350 million devices. Microsoft celebrated. They did not mention how many of those 350 million installations had been explicitly requested. In December 2016, Microsoft's own CMO, Chris Capicella, admitted the company had gone too far. Not apologized, admitted, past tense, already done, already irreversible. And once you were on Windows 10, the real product was waiting. It wasn't an operating system, it was a browser you didn't ask for, set as your default, that reset itself every time you changed it. If that made you angry, you should have been here for what came next. Subscribe, because we cover exactly this kind of corporate betrayal every single week. Microsoft launched Edge in 2015 as the default browser on every Windows 10 machine. Internet Explorer had collapsed from 96% market share in 2002 to under 20% by 2015. Killed not by Microsoft, but by users who chose Chrome and Firefox the moment they had the option. Edge was not chosen. It was installed. It was set as default. And when users changed their default browser, Windows 10 periodically reset it back to Edge without warning. The Browser Choice Alliance formally complained to regulators. The European Union's Digital Markets Act enforcement opened investigations into Microsoft's browser tactics in 2024. As of 2026, no fine had been issued. Edge's global market share, 5.3%, after a decade as the pre-installed, forced default browser on every Windows machine on the planet. Chrome, 65.7%. That is the market's verdict on forced adoption. Bing tells the same story. Microsoft launched it in June 2009, invested billions in marketing, cut deals with Yahoo, integrated AI, and set it as the default search engine on every Edge browser on every Windows machine in existence. In 2023, they invested $10 billion in OpenAI and relaunched Bing as the world's first AI-powered search engine. The press declared Google was finished. By 2026, after 17 years as the forced default on a billion machines, Bing held 5.14% of global search. Google, 90.02%. That is not a search engine. That is a rounding error on Google's balance sheet, 5.14%, after 17 years. After being impossible to avoid on a billion machines, Microsoft's response was not to accept defeat. It was to build something that made Bing irrelevant, because the new plan didn't need you to search, it needed you to be searched. On May 20th, 2024, Microsoft announced Recall, a feature for Copilot plus PCs that would take a screenshot of your screen every 5 seconds, store it locally, and let you search your entire computing history using natural language. They called it a photographic memory for your PC. Security researcher Kevin Beaumont built a tool called Total Recall in a single afternoon. It extracted and read the entire Recall database from any Copilot plus PC, Every website visited, every document opened, every message sent, including messages from Signal and WhatsApp, apps specifically designed to delete themselves. Every password field that had appeared on screen, every banking transaction, every medical record, all of it. Unencrypted. Accessible to any piece of malware that could reach the file. I'm genuinely shocked, Beaumont wrote. This is the most significant privacy vulnerability I have seen in a consumer product in years. The UK's Information Commissioner's Office launched a formal investigation before Recall had even shipped. Microsoft delayed the launch from June to December 2024. They made it opt-in. They added encryption. They added biometric authentication. What they did not do, cancel it, because Recall is not a feature. Recall is a data collection infrastructure. Microsoft has invested $10 billion in OpenAI, billions more in Azure AI, and staked the next decade of the company on AI adoption under Satya Nadella. Copilot is embedded in 400 million Windows 11 devices. Enterprise Copilot was priced at $30 per user per month at launch. The AI business needs data to function, your data, whether you agreed to provide it or not. Here is what 30 years of this actually teaches us. First, power without accountability creates contempt for users. Microsoft's pattern from Clippy to Recall is not bad engineering. It is the result of a company that has never faced real consequences for ignoring what users want. The 2001 antitrust settlement changed nothing. Windows 8 cost Sinofsky his job, but not Microsoft its dominance. The forced Windows 10 upgrades cost $10,000 in a single lawsuit. When the cost of ignoring users is that low, companies stop listening. Second, monopoly power does not guarantee product success. Bing held 5.14% of global search, after 17 years, as the default on a billion machines. Edge has 5.3% of browsers after a decade as the pre-installed default on every Windows PC. Internet Explorer went from 96% to irrelevance in 15 years. You can force installation, you cannot force preference. The moment users have a real alternative, they take it. Third, the most dangerous product is the one that collects data you didn't know you were giving. Clippy was annoying. Windows 8 was confusing. The forced Windows 10 upgrade was infuriating. Recall is different. It takes a screenshot every 5 seconds. It captures your deleted messages. It stores your banking information. It remembers every password field that appeared on your screen. And it was, until public outrage forced a change, on by default. The pattern started with a cartoon paperclip in 1997. It ends, for now, with an AI system that watches everything you do on your computer and stores it forever. You saw this coming. Doing what you tell it to do. They called it AtlasOS, and this time free actually meant free. Windows wasn't always like this. Windows XP launched in 2001. It was fast. It was stable. You bought it, you owned it, and Microsoft stayed out of your way. That was the deal. Windows 7 was even better. Released in 2009, it became the most beloved operating system ever built. At its peak, it ran on over 1.2 billion devices. Businesses built entire infrastructures around it. Gamers swore by it. Developers lived in it. It was clean, reliable, and completely under your control. The promise was simple. You pay for the software. The software works for you. Microsoft doesn't get involved after the sale. And it worked. Windows generated over $20 billion a year in licensing revenue. Office was a global standard. The company was worth hundreds of billions. They had a monopoly, a loyal user base, and a product people genuinely loved. Then someone in Redmond looked at what Google was doing with Android, harvesting behavioral data, building ad profiles, monetizing attention, and decided that $20 billion a year wasn't enough. They didn't need to build a better product. They already had the dominant one. They just needed to find a way to extract more from the people already using it. The decision they made next would betray every person who'd ever trusted them with their computer, and they'd wrap it in a bow and call it a gift. Because the most dangerous betrayal isn't the one that comes with a warning, it's the one that comes free. And in July 2015, they delivered it. July 29th, 2015. Microsoft pushed Windows 10 to 14 million devices in the first 24 hours. They called it the last version of Windows you'd ever need. Buried in the terms of service, in the pages nobody reads, was a clause that changed everything. Microsoft reserved the right to collect typed characters, voice input, touch input, handwriting, and full telemetry data from your device. Not opt-in, not a premium feature, on by default. For everyone, from day one. The numbers don't lie. Windows 10 contacted Microsoft's servers over 5,500 times in the first 8 hours on a fresh install. Even with telemetry set to Basic, the lowest available setting, it still transmitted identifiable user data, and there was no setting to turn it off completely. That option simply didn't exist. They didn't forget to add it, they chose not to. Then came the forced updates. Microsoft removed your ability to delay or decline them. Your computer would restart mid-work, mid-game, mid-presentation, because Microsoft's update schedule mattered more than whatever you were doing. What they promised? Windows 10 is designed to be the most personal Windows ever. What they delivered, an operating system that reported your behavior back to its creator without your knowledge or consent. That's not a bug. That's a product decision, made by people in a room who decided your privacy was worth less than their data pipeline, and they were betting you'd never find out, or that if you did, you wouldn't have anywhere else to go. They were wrong on both counts. If you thought Windows 10 was bad, Microsoft saw the backlash and doubled down. Windows 11 launched in October 2021. It required a Microsoft account just to set up your own computer. Not suggested, required. Your personal machine, gated behind a corporate login before you could use it. Then came the ads, not on websites, not in apps, inside Windows itself. Microsoft began testing advertisements inside the Start menu, inside File Explorer, inside the Settings app. They were turning the operating system into a storefront. You were the inventory. According to Microsoft's own annual report, their advertising revenue crossed $12 billion in 2023, fueled in part by behavioral data harvested from Windows users. Every search, every app launch, every file you opened, feeding a machine that sold your attention to the highest bidder, and then came Recall. Microsoft's AI feature that took screenshots of everything you did on your computer every few seconds and stored it in a searchable database. Your banking, your messages, your passwords, your private conversations, all of it, photographed, indexed, stored. Security researchers called it a keylogger built into the OS. Privacy advocates called it the most dangerous feature ever shipped in a consumer product. The backlash was immediate and explosive. Microsoft paused the rollout. They didn't cancel it, they didn't apologize, they just said they'd try again later. That's the tell. When a company gets caught doing something indefensible and their response is not yet, you know exactly what they think of you. Imagine you're 19. You just built your first serious PC. You saved for months. You install Windows 11. Within the first hour, it's asking for a Microsoft account. It's already sending telemetry. There's an ad in the Start menu of a computer you just built with your own hands. You open Task Manager. You watch background Microsoft processes eating your RAM. Processes you didn't install. Processes you can't remove. Processes that exist entirely for Microsoft's benefit, not yours. You go online. You find thousands of people with the same problem. Tutorials on disabling telemetry, but they only work partially. Guides on removing bloatware, but it reinstalls after updates. Workarounds for forced updates, but Microsoft patches them out. The system was designed to be inescapable, so you start building. That's exactly what happened. A small group of anonymous developers, unpaid, working in their spare time, began systematically dismantling Windows. Not to break it, to fix it. They documented every telemetry endpoint, every forced process, every piece of bloatware, every unnecessary service running in the background consuming your hardware for Microsoft's benefit. Then they built AtlasOS, a version of Windows that removes all of it. The surveillance, the bloat, the forced updates, the ads, the mandatory account, gone. What's left is a clean, fast, private operating system that does exactly what you tell it to do. Nothing more. The community called it the Windows Microsoft should have built. And the fact that a group of unpaid volunteers had to build it, that's the most damning thing in this entire story. AtlasOS isn't a concept. It's not a mod. It's a fully functional, community-maintained operating system built on top of Windows, and it requires a legitimate Windows license to run. You're not pirating anything. You're just removing what Microsoft added for themselves, and the performance difference is not subtle. According to AtlasOS's own benchmarks, RAM usage at idle drops from an average of 4.2 gigabytes on Windows 11 to under 2 gigabytes on AtlasOS on identical hardware. Boot times are roughly 40% faster. Background CPU usage drops by up to 50%. Over 200 telemetry endpoints are blocked by default. Forced updates are gone, you update when you decide to. The GitHub repository has over 15,000 stars, contributions from developers across 60-plus countries. Regular updates, active documentation, a community that actually responds when something breaks. For gamers, the gains are measurable in frames per second. On the same hardware, AtlasOS users consistently report 15 to 25% higher average FPS in CPU-intensive titles. Not because AtlasOS adds anything, because it removes what Microsoft forced in. Now put that in perspective. Microsoft charges up to $199 for a Windows 11 Pro license. AtlasOS is free. Microsoft employs over 220,000 people and spends billions on Windows development every year. AtlasOS was built by volunteers in their spare time. Microsoft has had 30 years to ship a clean, private, fast operating system. They chose not to. The community did it anyway, on nights and weekends, for nothing. And every person running AtlasOS right now is running Microsoft's own code, stripped of everything Microsoft added for Microsoft's benefit. They can't patch that out. The community moves faster than their legal team. Here's what Microsoft did when hundreds of thousands of people started stripping their operating system down to remove everything they'd built in. Nothing. No statement. No acknowledgement. No attempt to address the privacy concerns that drove people to AtlasOS in the first place. Just silence, and a continued rollout of the exact features people were fleeing. Here's the hypocrisy, stated plainly. The company that built the world's most used operating system decided that spying on its own customers was a feature, not a bug. They called it telemetry. They called it personalization. They called it improving your experience. What they didn't call it was what it was. Behavioral surveillance sold to advertisers, running on hardware you paid for, inside software you paid for, without your meaningful consent. And they can't defend that publicly. If they attack AtlasOS, they have to explain why they're defending forced telemetry and ads in a paid OS. If they ignore it, the community grows, so they chose silence. The community grew anyway. Meanwhile, the damage was compounding. Linux desktop adoption hit record highs in 2023 and 2024. Steam's hardware survey showed Linux gaming growing quarter over quarter. Developers who'd spent entire careers on Windows were publicly switching, not because Linux was perfect, because Microsoft had made Windows worse than the alternative. The most valuable users, power users, developers, content creators, the people who influence what everyone else installs, were leaving, and Microsoft's response was to keep adding features nobody asked for and keep removing control nobody wanted to give up. They still haven't learned, and the next wave of people building alternatives is already watching. Here's where things stand. Windows still runs on over 1.4 billion active devices. Microsoft hasn't lost the market, but they've lost something harder to replace than market share. They've lost the trust of the people who know enough to leave. AtlasOS has an active development community, regular updates, and a growing base of users who won't go back. Every single one of them is someone Microsoft pushed away with a decision made in a boardroom. 3 things this story proves. Beyond tech. 1. When you treat paying customers as a product, they'll eventually build an alternative. Microsoft had a monopoly and used it to extract more from users instead of delivering more to them. The community responded the only way it could. 2. The most dangerous competitor isn't a funded startup. It's the person you frustrated enough to spend their weekends fixing what you broke. AtlasOS wasn't marketed. It wasn't funded. It was built out of pure frustration with a company that stopped caring. 3. You can't force loyalty. Microsoft tried to make Windows inescapable. Mandatory accounts, forced updates, telemetry you can't disable. All they did was make the escape more satisfying. If you ever spent an afternoon trying to remove Microsoft's bloatware from your own computer, you were right. If you switched to AtlasOS or Linux, you were right. Microsoft bet that you'd accept whatever they gave you because you had no choice. They were wrong. The question now is whether any company is watching this and learning, or whether the next AtlasOS is already being built in someone's bedroom, because another corporation decided your frustration was an acceptable cost of doing business. What's the one thing you'd remove from Windows if you could? Drop it in the comments. And if you want more stories about the people fighting back against the companies that forgot who they work for, the next one hits even harder.